My first guest today is Congressman Ted Lieu, who represents California's 33rd District. He's a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee and a former active duty officer in the U.S. Air Force. My dad was in the Air Force, so I'm an Air Force brat. He currently serves as a colonel in the reserves. Congressman Lieu, I don't think I've seen you since we were together at UCLA. It's great to see you again. You've been a bit busy since then, and today, I know that you care about biodiversity. You care, and you passed legislation about the Santa Monica Mountains. But I'd love to understand from you what we're missing as we think about natural security in our nation. What is the missing piece on why we're not taking this broadly as seriously as we should?
Well, thank you, first of all, for inviting me. And I want to thank the Hill for highlighting this important issue. You mentioned President Biden earlier. Before, I want to note that President Biden created the climate czar position and put it in the National Security Council and appointed John Kerry. So the Biden administration is taking this very seriously. And the loss of biodiversity is essentially one of the crises right now. The rate of global change in nature during the past 50 years is unprecedented in history. And we simply have to mitigate or reverse this, because if we start losing biodiversity, that could have a significant impact not just on the world, but specifically on U.S. national security.
Congressman, I read, our underwriter today, let's just be clear about it. They've got a new report out, and I went in, I took a deep dive in this very, very big and important report. It was called The Security Threat That Binds Us. But in it, there's lots of vignettes of things I just didn't know about, like something like the coffee leaf rust epidemic and how this has destabilized significant portions of Central America. And one of the reasons we're seeing a massive rush at the border and migration challenges around the world has to do with violent weather, with deforestation, with new pandemics in foliage that have come along. And I'm just, it's a very different dimension to looking at some of our problems when you look at the fact that there may be a natural crisis that underlies them. Is there a sense of literacy about that among your colleagues?
It's starting to. I serve on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and I previously served on active duty in the U.S. Air Force. Last term, the Foreign Affairs Committee held a hearing on climate change and national security, and the ranking member, Representative McCall from Texas, in his opening speech, he essentially acknowledged climate change, acknowledged it was largely caused by humans, and stated it was affecting our national security. So that's a good step forward. Now, unfortunately, not that many Republicans actually say the same things that Representative McCall did. So we do have to educate more people. In terms of what you just mentioned, in terms of migration, there's been articles now coming out showing that the two hurricanes that struck also was causing this migration up now to our southern border. And what we're seeing are the effects of climate change and what scientists have been predicting for decade after decade, which is it's going to cause more extreme weather events, resulting in loss of crops, extreme drought, and migration that you're not expecting. And then just something as simple as, for example, studies showing that we appear to have more bees that are dying. And then if you don't have enough bees that pollinate, that can wreak havoc to the ecosystem. So there's lots of things we need to be concerned about.
Do you get the sense that the Pentagon, you mentioned the Air Force I know the Pentagon is making a lot of efforts on the climate side and also to some degree in water. But is there a sense as they think about their mission around the world and about how to have a less, I don't know how to call it, a less corrosive impact with the footprint of military activity, that they get that?
The Pentagon absolutely gets it. In fact, they've issued report after report highlighting their challenges of climate change and how it impacts national security. I previously served at Anderson Air Force Base on Guam. By the way, one of my colleagues on the Republican side doesn't understand that Guam isn't a foreign territory. So let me just be clear. Guam is a U.S. territory. It's very important to the United States. And the bases on Guam are actually one of those listed in the Pentagon's report as being particularly susceptible to climate change, whether it's rising ocean levels or more extreme typhoons or hurricanes. And what we're seeing from the Pentagon is an acknowledgement, not just now, but even under Republican administrations, that climate change is real and it's affecting national security. And my further point I want to point out about our Pentagon and our Defense Department is we've got the best military in the world. And one of the reasons is not just because of our amazing people, it's also because we rely on facts and science. Department of Defense doesn't just make things up. They look at the facts, they look at the science, and they've determined that climate change is real, it's being caused by humans, and it's affecting our national security.
So one of the things that I worry about, as I mentioned, I think the last time you and I spoke on stage was at UCLA when I was at the Atlantic, and I went to UCLA, was in Southern California. California takes these kinds of environmental concerns, sustainability, biodiversity very seriously. It's one of the most regulated states in the country when it comes to that, and yet there's still so many environmental challenges. From fires to mudslides to violent weather, and I'm just wondering whether we're doing something wrong. And I know you've been out there. You were happy with the Wilderness Public Lands Act, but I'm just sort of interested: are we doing the right things to save the biodiversity, to save natural security? Do we need to do a lot more, even in a place like California, than we're doing?
So first of all, let me just say, yay, that UCLA is in a Sweet 16. So happy about that. It's interesting you bring up California. One of the criticisms lobbed by some folks is that, hey, if you do environmental laws or regulations, somehow you're going to make the economy worse. And California has shown the opposite. California has some of the strongest climate change laws in the nation. And California, before the pandemic hit, became once again, the 5th largest economy in the entire world. And what we're seeing is that when you take actions to make your water cleaner, your air having less pollution, and when you're taking carbon and methane out of the air, it actually improves the quality of people's lives. It gets people to want to come to the state, and it can generate green energy and green jobs. So in terms of climate change laws in California, could they do more? Sure, they could do more. And I know the state legislature is working on additional laws to continue to address the issues of climate change.
The other, just before I go to a question from the audience for you, one of the things I know, we're talking about the world, a global threat. And as I sit and I look and I watch Brazil and what's going on with the deforestation, with the fires that have been there, I try to look at India. What we do is we're going to go to the Glasgow climate change conference in November, and India saying, "Hey, we're not necessarily going to play ball." What is our leverage on the global biodiversity challenge in influencing the behavior of other major large landmass, large population countries like China, like Brazil, like India?
That's a great point, and climate change is a worldwide problem. That's why I'm so pleased that the Biden administration brought us back into the Paris Climate Accord. One of the reasons I ran for Congress is my view that climate change is an existential threat, not just to California or America, but to the entire world. And the way that we solve this is we get the rest of America to do what California did and the rest of the world to do what America hopefully will do soon, because we can't solve this just by ourselves. We do have to lead by example. We do have to also use our entire diplomatic force to try to get other countries to try to also take climate change seriously. And the good news is a number of countries are taking climate change seriously. I think they could all do more, but we've shifted in just a decade or so from a bunch of people denying that climate change even is happening to now people who are acknowledging it. And that's a very good first step. And now we just have to start executing policies that are going to mitigate climate change.
Congressman, we have a question for you from Karen Russell. Karen?
My name is Karen Russell, and I'm the founder of the Climate Change Working Group of Frederick County, Maryland. I have 2 questions. The first is, what is the status of the Wildlife Corridors Bill? And the second asks for a comment on our culture's view of nature as exploitable, not really understanding that we destroy ourselves if we destroy the natural world. Thank you.
So thank you. So I'll take your second question first. You're absolutely right that we do destroy ourselves if we destroy the natural world. Ecosystems are complicated, and if you mess one part up, it could have rippling effects throughout the entire ecosystem. In addition, if we lose, for example, a species, nearly impossible to get that species back unless somehow we preserve the DNA and sometime in the future we can recreate it. But really, really difficult to do that. And who knows what species might hold the next cure to some really important medicine that some people need. So it is a big problem when we're causing species to go extinct, when we're changing our environment, and when we don't really know what the actual effects may or may not be 10, 20, 30 years down the line. Regarding your first question, I honestly don't have an update at this exact moment on the Wildlife Corridors bill. We will look into it and get back to you and let the Hill know as well.
Great. Ted, what is happening? What have you been doing with the Santa Monica Mountains? I know that you've been pushing legislation. You've been pleased with things there. As a guy who's hiked through the Santa Monica Mountains quite a bit, I mean, what has been your achievement in that area?
It is a beautiful area, as you know. And so federal resources can help if it's been designated basically a federal recreation area. And so I have a study in to actually extend that geographic footprint to include not just the Santa Monica Mountains, but also much larger areas of LA County, going down south from the Santa Monica Mountains, with the eye towards getting more federal resources for conservation and for other important environmental programs.
Well, Congressman Ted Lieu, member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Great Southern California, I really appreciate your willingness to kind of open the aperture on what that national security ought to include a concern for natural security. And there's not a lot of folks out there that yet have that aperture as wide open. I know you do, and I'm really glad that you're taking it so seriously and that you shared your thoughts with us today.
Thank you so much. And thank you again for highlighting this important issue.